Have you ever made a promise you couldn't keep? A small vow, maybe to a friend, or a serious oath to a loved one. In our world, a broken promise might lead to disappointment, perhaps an argument. But what if a promise was so powerful, so fundamentally binding, that not even death could break it? Imagine a world where your final words could literally call you back from the grave. This isn't just a ghost story, it's a tale about the weight of a promise, an ancient pact between the living and the land itself. In the dawn of time, when the world was younger and magic still clung to the air like morning mist, words held a different kind of power. A promise wasn't just a string of sounds, it was a piece of your soul, a commitment etched into the very earth you stood on. To make a promise was to bind yourself not just with honor, but with the essence of your being. It was a tangible force, as heavy and real as the breath in your lungs. And when you spoke a vow, you weren't just giving your word, you were tethering your spirit to a task, a commitment that the land itself would remember long after you were gone. Our story begins in a village nestled by a wide, winding river. Here lived a fisherman named Osei. He was a master of his craft, his hands calloused from years of mending nets and carving paddles. His greatest ambition was to build the perfect boat, one that could glide through the water as silently as a fish and withstand the river's fiercest moods. He'd promised his young son, before the next rainy season, "I will build you a vessel that dances on the water, a boat worthy of our family." He poured his heart into the project, selecting the finest wood, planning every curve and joint with meticulous care. But a sudden fever, fierce and unforgiving, claimed Osei before he could finish his work. The half-finished hull of the boat lay by the riverbank, a sad monument to an unfulfilled vow. The village mourned, and his son wept for the father and the boat that would never be. 3 nights after Osei was laid to rest, something extraordinary happened. The village dogs began to bark at unseen things, and a strange chill settled over the riverside. When the sun rose, the villagers gathered at the water's edge, their eyes wide with disbelief. There, moored gently by the bank, was a boat. It was perfect. The wood was sanded to a flawless sheen, the joints were seamless, and the prow was carved into the likeness of a river hawk. It was Osei's design, completed with a skill that no living craftsman in the village possessed. The half-finished hull was gone, replaced by this masterpiece. They knew with a certainty that chilled them to the bone that Osei had returned. He had come back from the land of the dead to finish what he started, to honor the promise made to his son. Once his work was done, he was gone, his spirit finally at peace. Osei's return was not an isolated event. It was the first ripple in a pattern that would soon redefine the village's understanding of life, death, and duty. A few weeks later, a young woman who had passed away while teaching her younger sister a complex ceremonial song was heard humming in the night. The following morning, her sister found she knew the song perfectly, every note and word flawlessly committed to memory. Then there was the hunter who had borrowed a prized spear from his friend, but died in an accident before he could return it. One night, the spear simply reappeared. Resting against its owner's door, cleaned and sharpened, it became clear the dead were returning, not as vengeful spirits or terrifying ghouls, but as dutiful souls bound by unfinished business. They were driven by the overwhelming need to complete their tasks, to fulfill their vows, to close the loops they had left open in the world of the living. Only then could they find true and final rest. Their appearances were quiet, focused, and always centered on fulfilling that one last promise. They were a silent, nocturnal workforce of the departed, tidying up the loose ends of their lives. The village elders, wise and deeply connected to the old ways, understood the gravity of what was happening. This was a sacred and terrifying phenomenon. They convened a council and, after much deliberation, established a new village law: every promise, every vow, Every significant oath made by a villager was to be recorded. They inscribed these words onto wet clay tablets, which were then fired and stored in a sacred chamber. This became the village's living record of commitments. The law was simple and absolute. First, never make a promise lightly, for its weight could pull your spirit back from the afterlife. And second, never, ever hinder the dead in their work. To interfere with a returning spirit was to risk trapping them between worlds, a fate worse than death itself. With this new law came a new set of rules for the night. The villagers learned to respect the darkness, for it belonged to the returning spirits. The dead rose only after the last light of dusk had faded and vanished before the first rays of dawn. During these hours, they were unstoppable forces of nature. You couldn't barricade a door against a father determined to finish a carving for his child, nor could you reason with a mother returning to weave the final threads of a wedding blanket. They were unyielding, focused only on their single, sworn purpose. They were bound entirely by the words of their promise. If a vow was unclear or ambiguous, the spirit could become confused, trapped in a loop of repeating a task that could never be truly finished. A promise to always be there could lead to a spirit simply standing in a room, night after night, for eternity. Even more dangerous were false or impossible vows. A promise built on a lie could shatter a spirit's purpose, leaving it to wander as a lost, sorrowful echo, unable to complete its task and unable to move on. The night, therefore, became a time of caution and respect. Over generations, the village culture transformed completely. The weight of these spectral visits changed the very way people spoke and thought. Promises became incredibly rare. A vow was no longer a casual assurance. It was a sacred contract, a spiritual undertaking of the highest order. People chose their words with extreme care, knowing that a simple sentence could become an eternal chain. They learned to live with certainty, to act with intention, and to speak only what they knew in their hearts they could fulfill. Children were taught from birth that some words are too powerful to be spoken without absolute conviction. The living had adapted, learning to coexist with the dead by understanding the profound and unbreakable weight of a promise. Their world was a constant reminder that our words have power, and some bonds, once forged, can never be broken, not even by death itself. Thank you so much for watching. If this story made you think about the power of words, consider liking this video and subscribing for more tales that explore the deep and mysterious corners of our imagination. See you next time.